The wind howls across the North Sea like the breath of ancient gods. Waves the size of mountains crash against wooden hulls, sending salt spray into the faces of men who know no fear. This is where our story begins, not in the halls of kings, but in the savage, beautiful emptiness where sea meets sky, where a boy named Bjorn would become a legend that would echo through 1,000 years. They said he was born during the worst storm in living memory. The night Bjorn Ironheart entered this world, lightning split the sky over his father's longhouse, and the midwife swore she heard the Valkyries singing. His mother died bringing him into the cold Norwegian winter, her last words a prophecy whispered through blood-flecked lips. He will burn brighter than the sun, and like the sun, he will set in flame. His father, Ragnar the Red, was a minor chieftain, respected but unremarkable, holding a small fjord settlement with barely 300 souls. Ragnar wanted his son to be cautious, to preserve what little they had. But Bjorn's eyes burned with something else. Even as a child, watching the longships return from raids, he didn't see adventure or glory. He saw destiny. The clang of steel on steel, the roar of men charging into the unknown, the smell of pine and blood and salt. At 15, Bjorn stood 6 feet tall, his shoulders already broad as an oak. His hair, the color of raven's wings, fell past his shoulders, and his eyes, those eyes, were the pale blue of glacial ice, cold enough to freeze your soul. But it was his smile that truly terrified people. It was the smile of a man who had seen his own death and laughed at it. The first time Bjorn led a raid, he was 17. His father had finally relented, allowing him to join a small expedition to the coast of Northumbria. The target was a monastery, easy pickings, his father said, a training run. But Bjorn saw something else. While the other raiders filled their arms with silver candlesticks and jeweled crosses, Bjorn walked past the treasures. He found the monastery's library, where a terrified monk cowered among scrolls and manuscripts. The others wanted to kill him. Bjorn wanted to learn from him. "Teach me," Bjorn said in broken Saxon, his sword still dripping with the blood of the monastery's guards. "Teach me about the world beyond these shores." The monk's name was Brother Aldrich, and for 6 months Bjorn kept him alive as a prisoner tutor. While his father counted silver, Bjorn learned to read. He studied maps. He memorized the names of kingdoms, the patterns of trade routes, the weaknesses of empires. His father called it a waste of time. Bjorn called it preparation. Thunder rumbles across black clouds. The taste of rain mixes with smoke from 100 burning villages. The betrayal came on a winter night when Bjorn was 23. His father's closest friend, Ivar the Snake, a man Bjorn had called uncle his entire life, stood in their mead hall surrounded by 30 armed warriors. Ivar's eyes were dead, emotionless, as he delivered his ultimatum. "Your father is weak, Bjorn. He sits on a pile of silver while our people starve. He turns away warriors who wish to join us because he fears growth. He has forgotten what it means to be Viking." Ivar's hand rested on his sword. "I'm taking the settlement. You can stand with me, or die with him." Bjorn looked at his father, slumped in his high seat, suddenly looking every one of his 50 years. Ragnar the Red had fought 100 battles, survived countless wounds, but this broke him. The betrayal drained the life from his eyes. The hall fell silent. 30 warriors against Bjorn, his father, and perhaps a dozen loyal men. The mathematics of death were simple. Bjorn smiled. "Uncle Ivar," he said, his voice carrying across the hall like a blade whistling through air. "Do you know why my mother named me Bjorn? It means bear. And do you know what a bear does when it's cornered?" He didn't wait for an answer. The next 5 minutes became legend. Bjorn moved through Ivar's warriors like the winter wind, inevitable, unstoppable, deadly. His axe sang, his sword danced, and his roar shook the rafters. Blood painted the floor in spreading pools. Bodies fell like wheat before a scythe. But there were too many. A blade found his ribs. Another opened his shoulder. Bjorn fell to one knee, blood soaking his tunic, his vision blurring. Ivar stood over him, sword raised for the killing blow. Then the doors exploded inward. 50 warriors poured into the hall, not Ivar's men, but strangers, mercenaries, killers from across the north. At their head walked a woman who seemed carved from winter itself. Her name was Astrid the White, and she was the most feared shield maiden in 3 kingdoms. "Ivar the Snake," she said, her voice sharp as broken ice. "I've been hired to kill you. Your own wife sends her regards." What followed was not a battle but a massacre. Ivar's men died screaming. Ivar himself begged, wept, tried to bargain with his life. Bjorn, bleeding on the floor, watched it all through fatting eyes. Astrid walked to where he lay and knelt beside him. Up close, she was terrifying. Scars crossed her face like a map of violence, and her eyes held the empty calm of someone who had killed so many times that death had become boring. "Your reputation precedes you, Bjorn Ironheart," she said. "I've heard stories. They say you're dangerous. They say you're destined for greatness." She studied him with professional interest. "I want to see if it's true, so here's my offer: heal or die, your choice." Bjorn coughed blood, grinned through red-stained teeth, and whispered, "I choose everything." The crackle of longship oars cutting through water, the smell of tar and sweat and ambition. 3 years later, Bjorn commanded a fleet of 40 longships. His father had died in his sleep the winter after Ivar's betrayal. Some said of heartbreak, others whispered poison. Bjorn became chieftain of a settlement that had grown from 300 souls to 3,000. Warriors flocked to his banner, not just Norsemen but Danes, Swedes, even Saxon outcasts and Irish exiles. But Bjorn wanted more than a settlement. He wanted an empire. Astrid became his right hand, his shield maiden, his most trusted killer. Together they were unstoppable. She handled the brutality, he handled the strategy. She was the hammer, he was the mind that chose where to strike. But there was a third in their inner circle, Sigurd the Wise, a skald and advisor who had once served kings. Sigurd had a silver tongue that could turn enemies into allies and allies into devoted followers. Where Bjorn saw conquest and Astrid saw battle, Sigurd saw politics, alliances, the long game of power. "You can't just take what you want," Sigurd would say, his voice smooth as honey. "You must make people want to give it to you." The tension between Astrid and Sigurd was a living thing. Crackling in every council meeting, she trusted only steel, he trusted only words. Bjorn trusted both and neither. Their first true conquest was Dublin, the Norse-Irish city that controlled trade routes across the Irish Sea. The king there, Olaf the Fat, had twice Bjorn's ships and 5 times his silver. Everyone said it was impossible. Bjorn didn't attack. He waited, watched, learned. For 6 months his spies infiltrated Dublin. His traders made friends. His silver bought whispers. And when he finally struck, it wasn't with swords but with information. Olaf the Fat had a secret. His young wife was his cousin's daughter, and the marriage that legitimized his claim was invalid under church law. Bjorn didn't care about church law, but he knew the Irish bishops did. Sigurd delivered the evidence to the right priests. Astrid arranged for key guards to be elsewhere. And when the moment came, Bjorn walked into Dublin's Great Hall not as a conqueror, but as its people's liberator from a corrupt, illegitimate king. Olaf's head decorated the city walls by sunset. Bjorn wore his crown by dawn. The screech of seabirds over conquered harbors, the weight of gold on shoulders built for war. Within 5 years, Bjorn controlled the Irish Sea. Within 10, his influence reached the coasts of France and Britain. He didn't just raid, he built. He established trade routes, forged alliances through marriage and blood oaths, turned raiding camps into permanent settlements. His empire grew not just through conquest but through something more dangerous. He made people believe in him. Kings from Constantinople to Cordoba knew his name. Merchants paid tribute for safe passage. Warriors dreamed of joining his ranks. Songs of Bjorn Ironheart spread across Europe, each verse more exaggerated than the last, until the man and the myth became inseparable. But empires are not built on loyalty alone. They're built on jealousy, ambition, and the inevitable betrayals that come when power is at stake. Sigurd the Wise grew ambitious. He whispered to jarls and chieftains, painting Bjorn as too cautious, too willing to negotiate when they should be conquering. "He's gone soft," Sigurd said in careful, private conversations. "He treats with priests and merchants like some Saxon king. Is this what we left Norway for?" Astrid the White grew tired. 20 years of killing had hollowed her out, left her with nightmares that no amount of mead could drown. She saw Bjorn growing into something she couldn't recognize, a king, a diplomat, a man who wore silk and negotiated treaties. "Where is the boy who fought Ivar's men with nothing but rage and iron?" she asked him one night. "Where is the Viking I followed?" Bjorn saw it all. He wasn't blind to Sigurd's ambitions or Astrid's doubts, but he had learned something that neither understood. The hardest battles aren't fought with swords. They're fought with choices, with sacrifice, with the slow, grinding weight of responsibility. The crisis came in his 40th year. A coalition formed against him. Saxon kings, Irish chieftains, even some of his own jarls, all coordinated by Sigurd's careful whispers. They planned to strike simultaneously, to break his empire in a single, crushing blow. Astrid brought him the news, her face carved from stone. "Sigurd is the architect. I have proof. Let me kill him." Bjorn stood at the window of his hall in Dublin, watching the sea. For a long moment he said nothing. "No," he finally replied. "What?" Astrid's hand flew to her sword. "He's betraying you. He'll destroy everything you've built." "Yes," Bjorn said calmly, "he will try." The howl of wind through empty ship masts, the silence before thunder. What happened next, few believed possible. Bjorn called a great gathering, a thing in the old tradition. Every jarl, every chieftain, every warrior of note in his empire came to Dublin, including Sigurd, including the conspirators. For 3 days they feasted and drank and celebrated past glories. On the 4th day, Bjorn stood before them all in the great hall, unarmed, unarmored, wearing only a simple tunic. "I know of the plot," he said simply. The hall erupted. Hands flew to weapons. Men shouted denials, accusations, threats. Sigurd's face went pale as death. Bjorn let the chaos build, then raised one hand. Silence fell like a blade. "I know of the plot," he repeated, "because I would have made the same one." He looked around the room, his ice-blue eyes finding every conspirator, every doubter, every ambitious warrior who had dreamed of taking his place. "You're right, I have changed. The boy who killed Ivar's men in blood rage is gone. The young warrior who took Dublin through cunning is gone. I am 40 years old. I am tired. I am scarred. I spend more time with merchants than warriors, more time writing treaties than wielding swords." He paused, and in that pause, something shifted in the room. "You wonder if I've forgotten what it means to be Viking. You wonder if I've grown weak." Bjorn's smile was sad, ancient, terrible. "So I will show you. I will give you what you want." He drew a dagger from his belt and drove it into the table. "Tomorrow morning on the beach outside this city, I will fight any man here, one at a time or all at once. No armor, no tricks, just steel and will. If you win, the empire is yours. If I win—" His eyes found Sigurd. "We never speak of this again. We bind ourselves blood to blood and we build something that will outlast all of us." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Sigurd stood slowly. His face was a mask of complicated emotions, shame, fear, respect, ambition, all warring within him. "You would risk everything on this." "Everything I've built is already at risk," Bjorn replied. "This way at least it's honest." The crash of waves on blood-soaked sand, the taste of salt and iron. 17 men came to the beach that dawn. 17 warriors, each believing they could take an empire with their sword arm. They formed a line, weapons glinting in the rising sun, confidence radiating from every scar and sneer. Bjorn stood alone, barefoot in the surf, wearing only trousers and holding his father's old sword, the blade that had seen 100 battles and never broken. Astrid stood at the edge of the beach, refusing to watch and unable to look away. This was madness, beautiful, terrible madness. The first warrior charged. What happened over the next hour became the stuff of immediate legend. Bjorn didn't just fight, he dominated. He moved like water, like wind, like something more than human. Every lesson from 30 years of warfare, every scar earned, every death witnessed, all of it flowed through him in a display of raw, transcendent violence. He broke them. Not just their bodies, but their spirits. One by one they fell, wounded, disarmed, defeated, but alive. Bjorn took no killing blows. He could have. They knew he could have, but he didn't. By the time the last warrior dropped his sword in surrender, Bjorn was covered in cuts, bleeding from a dozen wounds, swaying on his feet from exhaustion. But he was standing. He turned to face the crowd that had gathered, his entire empire, watching in stunned silence. "I am tired," Bjorn said, his voice carrying despite his exhaustion. "I am old, I have changed, but I am still Viking, and more than that." He looked at each of them in turn. "I am still yours if you'll have me." Sigurd was the first to kneel. Then Astrid, tears streaming down her scarred face. Then every warrior, every jarl, every soul on that beach. They knelt not to a king, but to a man who had proven that strength wasn't just about the ability to kill. It was about the will to lead, to sacrifice, to be more than just a weapon. The whisper of wind through tree branches, the gentle lap of water against a ship at rest. But here is where the story takes its final, unexpected turn. That night, as healers tended Bjorn's wounds and the Empire celebrated their renewed unity, Astrid came to his chamber. She looked different. The weariness was still there, but something else had replaced the hollowness in her eyes. "I'm leaving," she said simply. Bjorn looked up surprised. "Because I won. Because you showed me something I'd forgotten." She sat beside him, this legendary shield maiden, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked at peace. "You proved that changing isn't weakness, that growing beyond what you were isn't betrayal, it's survival." She touched the scars on her face, each one a story of violence and pain. "I've killed for 25 years, Bjorn. I've been your sword, your hammer, your dealer of death, and I've been good at it, but watching you on that beach, you were fighting, yes, but you were fighting to build something, not destroy it. You were fighting to unite people, not conquer them." She stood, settling her sword belt. "I need to find out who Astrid is when she's not killing. Maybe she's a farmer, maybe she's a mother, maybe she's just a woman who can sleep without nightmares. I don't know, but I need to find out." Bjorn felt tears in his eyes, for her, for himself, for everything they'd built and lost and become. "You'll always have a place here." "I know," she smiled, and it transformed her scarred face into something beautiful. "That's why I can leave." She walked to the door, paused, looked back. "You asked me once why I saved you from Ivar all those years ago. You want to know the truth. I saw something in you that night, not strength, not even destiny. I saw a boy who was about to become a story, and I wanted to be part of that story, even if just for a chapter." Her smile widened. "Thank you for letting me be part of yours." She left, and Bjorn never saw her again. But he heard stories. Stories of a farm in the north where a scarred woman taught orphaned children how to fight, how to read, how to be more than their circumstances. Stories of a shield maiden who had found her greatest conquest in peace. The crackle of fire in a hearth, the laughter of children playing, the quiet satisfaction of a life fully lived. Bjorn Ironheart ruled his empire for 20 more years. Under his leadership, it grew not through conquest but through trade, alliance, and something revolutionary for his people: law. He created codes that protected the weak, settled disputes, and gave voice to those who had none. He built schools where his own tutor, Brother Aldrich, whom he had freed years before, taught reading and writing to Viking children alongside Christian prayers. He married a Saxon princess not for love but for alliance. Love came later slowly in shared laughter and quiet mornings. They had 6 children. He taught them to fight, to read, to think, to be more than just Vikings or Saxons, but something new. Sigurd remained his closest advisor, the guilt of his betrayal forging an unbreakable loyalty. They became true friends, the kind forged in failure and forgiveness. And when Bjorn died at 63, not in battle but in his sleep, surrounded by his family, the empire wept. Kings from every shore sent tribute. Skalds composed sagas that would be sung for centuries. But the truth that none of them knew, the secret Bjorn carried to his grave, was this. The morning of that beach fight, Astrid had come to him with a cup of mead. In that mead was a mixture of herbs, not poison but something else. Something that turned pain into focus, exhaustion into energy, fear into clarity. It was a warrior's last gift, a final act of love from someone who knew that her king needed to win not just with skill, but with something that looked like magic. She had drugged him to give him an edge, knowing it might kill him, knowing he would never forgive her if he found out. She had done it anyway because that's what love is, doing the impossible thing, the unforgivable thing, if it means the person you love survives. Bjorn had known. He'd tasted it immediately, recognized the bitter undercurrent beneath the honey. And he'd drunk it anyway, understanding what she was offering, what she was sacrificing. That's why he let her go without argument, without asking her to stay. It was his gift to her, freedom earned through one final betrayal done out of love. That was the real secret of how one Viking conquered empires and inspired legends. Not through strength alone, or cunning alone, or even destiny alone, but through the impossible alchemy of violence and wisdom, ambition and mercy, conquest and construction, and above all, through the love of people willing to betray themselves for something greater than any one life. The wind still howls across the North Sea. The waves still crash. But now in the places where Bjorn Ironheart walked, there are cities where there were camps, laws where there was chaos, and stories where there was silence. His empire eventually fell, as all empires do. His name was forgotten by some, remembered by others, transformed by legend until the truth became impossible to separate from myth. But here's what remains true, across centuries and seas and the infinite distances between then and now. One person can change the world, not by being perfect, but by being present, not by never falling, but by rising every time, not by refusing to change, but by embracing transformation as the ultimate form of strength. Bjorn was a killer who learned to build, a raider who learned to rule, a boy born in storm who became a man who could weather any tempest. He was Viking, but he became more. He was warrior, but he became wise. He was legend, but he was also just a man, scarred, tired, imperfect mortal. And if someone like him could look at the world and say, "I will change this," if someone born in blood and violence could choose to create instead of just destroy, if someone who should have been just another forgotten warrior could become a legend that echoes through time, then so can you. Whatever your storm, whatever your battle, whatever your impossible dream, you have within you the same thing Bjorn had. Not destiny, not magic, just the stubborn, beautiful, terrifying human capacity to become more than you are. The Skalds don't sing of the people who played it safe. They sing of the ones who dared. So dare. The North Sea is still calling. The longships are waiting. And somewhere in your heart, there's a beach where 17 versions of your doubts and fears are lined up, waiting to be defeated. Face them, not with perfection, but with presence. Not with invincibility, but with the courage to bleed and still keep standing. This is the legacy of Bjorn Ironheart. This is the lesson of the Vikings. This is the truth that echoes across time. You are not defined by where you start, or even where you end. You are defined by what you choose to become along the way. And the choosing is everything. The saga ends, the fire burns low, but the story never truly dies. Scal to those who dare, to those who transform, to those who understand that the greatest conquest is not of lands or empires, but of the impossible territory between who we are and who we might become. Scal